Hello everyone and welcome to the Khazan review episode. So, as always, I will begin the review episode with a few important points. So, the first one, a review is a subjective form, and likewise this will also be. I will try to give my honest, unbiased opinion on the things, but it's kinda hard when, you hear the fanboying bleed into the pros and cons, you say. But I do, for every pro, I do try to seek out if there are any cons alike, or if there are things that are even gray areas in those reviews. So be in mind that this is my opinion, and others' opinion may vary. So yeah. Second, the game is bought with my own money, which means no one is paying for this review, and no one influences what I say about the game. So this is all me. Third, this review is spoiler-free. I will talk about the story only in a general manner, and I will likely talk a bit about the broader world, or in this case, a little bit of DFO fluff, because this game is based on the Dungeon Fighter world. And I won't talk about anything that's happening during the playthrough. In the background you'll see a loop of me playing, which you can see various areas or NPCs, without any spoilers of what they mean to the story or where on what this area is supposed to mean. It's just some gameplay. So yeah, generally spoiler free. The last point is that this video will be divided into sections, as always. All will be on the timeline, on the video, and in the description of this video. So if you are interested in only, let's say, graphics or gameplay or something like that, feel free to pick and choose. So yeah, that will be all for the important points, I think. Oh, and as per the previous review, I am dropping the what internet says section on behalf of me, just saying more about what I think, as a part of the evolution of the review videos. So, strap yourselves in, we're gonna talk about Khazan. And on to the first section. So, the first section will be the general overview. So, Khazan is set in the Dungeon Fighter Online universe about 800 years before the events of DFO, I believe. Here we bear witness to some of the more legendary moments shaping the history of future Arad, and we explore the untold story of Khazan, the very first Berserker. Khazan is quite frequently described as a Souls-like game, online in various outlets or places, to which I would personally say I do not agree with, as I think that it is neither similar in terms of combat or encounter design, as Khazan favors more action-like approach to the combat, and it's more fluid, promoting combos and a aggressive approach, to which Souls-like fans will see a great contrast to the Dark Souls series, as Dark Souls combat is more about positioning and maneuvering in patterns of enemy attacks. Is it parrying, dodging, rolling, etc.? You just kinda need to take your time, observe, and learn. The aggressive approach is, if you manage to learn all those patterns, you can parry them, but it's still positioning. And fighting more than one, or more than two even, enemies is suicide in the Souls games. Unless it's very weak enemies like rats or zombies or skellies. Which is not the case in Khazan, if you know your way around your moveset. It sounds at first like a minor difference when I say approach to combat, but having played both series, I can tell you that the difference is quite noticeable at the very start even. Especially at the very start, I would say. Same goes for the story and presentation. From Dark Souls, you would recall, for those who played it, that the story is not so upfront. For those that hadn't, I would say that the Dark Souls story is not hidden, maybe, per se, but it's not presented through dialogues or cutscenes as much as it's presented throughout the world, through items, locations, lore tidbits in dialogues, etc., etc. You have to piece the story together in most Souls games, which is not the fact in Khazan. So that's another quite glaring difference. Khazan is also steeped in dungeon fighter lore, as, like I said, it's placed in the same world of Arad in the past, but there are characters, monsters even, and events that DFO players will definitely see a lot of, I'm not gonna say similarities because it's the same world, we'll definitely see a lot of throw-ins. That the further lore, that the earlier lore, going from the when the game went out, when the game premiered perspective. So this is definitely something for the fans, and they will have a lot here for themselves. And me, as a long-time player of DFO, I was very happy with the way they presented it. You know, because they found a way to make it work. Not just slap in retold lore, you know, which I like very much. And for the players not familiar with DFO, that is Dungeon Fighter Online, they will actually learn the lore at a steady pace and will not feel left out, which is also a pro in my head, because it's easy to take an established lore and world and just plunge your story into it without the care for audience who didn't play your first game. But a different thing is getting the lore, using it, and presenting it in a way where someone who didn't play your previous game can actually understand the importance of characters and what is happening. So here, knowing the lore gives us an additional bonus of kinda placing it in the world and timeline a bit better and knowing overarching elements of the events happening. I like this very much. We'll talk more about that in the next section. So, the next section will be the story one. Here we assume the role of General Khazan, a hero of the Pelos Empire who, along with his best friend Ozma, a powerful mage, defeated the Berserker dragon Hismar, who was one of the biggest scourges of the Empire. After which, they became one of the beloved heroes of the people of Pelos, and legendary figures in the story, as well as history of the world. And unfortunately, due to certain insecurity, and maybe something else, of one emperor, our heroes were branded traitor to the Empire. Having been tortured and unlawfully sentenced, Khazan has been exiled, awaiting to meet his end. But quite fortunately, he is saved by a stroke of luck and the help of a certain angry spirit. Now bound together, they set on a mutually beneficial quest that will unveil a lot more than it seems on the surface. The story premise is quite neatly put before us, and from the very start it's clear of what our goals are at first. Like mentioned earlier, fans of the DFO universe will see a lot of familiar places, peoples, events, but additionally we get a deeper dive into the historical, from the point of view of current Arad, view of events. This also does not mean that it's only surface level story, as with our journey we get a little bit more information and explore the nuances of characters and motifs behind their actions. A plus here is that it's not something that takes a secondary place to the action parts, which one would, I think, have a inclination seeing the genre in the gameplay, because in those type of games there is a trend to having the story be only basic, surface level, and the action taking the place on the forefront, which was changed by the Soul series from Software and its legendary world building. And I would also like to say that the story here is faithful to the lore established in the broader, bigger entry, DFO. But like I mentioned in the overview, new players don't need to be scared that they need to play an old now multiplayer game, because even if you don't know the broader story of Arad, you can experience Khazan and actually understand where everything is coming from, as this is sort of a origin story, not only for the Berserker class gameplay, as well as for Khazan and other events taking place in the bigger world. Which I think it's neat, because we don't need to look around a wiki or something like that. We can invite our friends that haven't played DFO, and they can have fun with this one here. What's the word I'm looking for here? The upside, in contrast to the Soul series story, is that the story here is not as fragmented and distributed along items, locations, and different collectibles as it is in the Souls-like, because in Souls-like even a piece of equipment, if you go into inventory and check it out, can have a brief lore information that actually sets it in a place in the whole overarching events of the game. Here, not so much. You can get the whole story without being a super explorative collectible guy. There are lore and fluff pieces that you can acquire throughout the playthrough. They're not exactly hidden. Most of them you can see if you look around playing. And getting them is basically acquiring a letter or a diary or something like that, with a brief description of what a either side character or a observer of current events, be it a main character, a side character, or just a normal peasant or a guard, sees during, well, during different points of action in the story, you know. So I like that you don't need to piece it, and even if you miss some of the fluff, you can actually get the full view of the story from what you can see in the game. And that's a plus from me. And I think that would be all for the story section, as even though it's not surface level, it does act as a means to promote the action and gameplay. And that's what we'll dive into in the next section. Okay, the meat and potatoes here. The gameplay section. The first Berserker, is a fast-paced action game from a third-person perspective. Fights are dynamic, allowing for different approaches depending on the situations. You can guard, dodge, reflect, and counter enemy attacks depending on the attack, and the first two also have their perfect variants that need to be done in specific moments to trigger. You can also spec into some of the abilities, giving you various bonuses while using them. All of this requires you to carefully manage your stamina, which is the main resource aside from health in battle. There are also special attacks that cost spirit points to use, and add to that the inventory that we take with us into battle, and we can not only use a limited number of big heals, but also items like smaller heals given to us from various soul stones, weapon enhancing items, be it elemental enhancements or things like that, to status curing potions, or, well, simply bombs. Sounds nice? Yeah, oh yeah, we have options. Similarly, to our hero, enemies also have a health and stamina bar, which is quite important here in the gameplay, as our attacks do deplete their stamina bar and allow for a stun, which can potentially lead to a brutal attack, or even, if you dwindle their health down, to a fight-ending execution attack, which you can also spec into. This means that, depending on the enemy type and their movements, sometimes you would be more comfortable with grinding down their stamina instead of their health. Yeah, there's a amount of tactical inclination in the combat. So you gotta think about how you're comfortable with the enemy that you're facing. Do you swoop in with your big boy attacks and do maximum damage? Or, to not have to deal with a moveset that you yourself find problematic to either dodge or position through? Or, well, to point those into perspective, like a certain rapier-wielding enemy that I faced during the LP, which gave me quite a lot of trouble. To maybe smart positioning and attacking the guard point or reflecting to demolish their stamina bar and just end it in a one big combo. The enemies here do differ quite a lot from each other, which is good, but there's also a con here. And the con is that, honestly, for the length of the game, there are not a lot of enemy types here. You will be frequently seeing the same enemies you saw earlier in the game. Be it undead or dragonkin or something like that, you will kinda see them a lot. Thankfully, due to how well executed the combat system is, that is not much of a problem, I believe. At least it wasn't for me. I was more invested in trying to perform a nice combo or use a flashy ability to link it with a combo for stylish points and great satisfaction, personally, instead of actually noticing that I'm fighting the same enemy all the time. You do notice that, I do agree, but like I said, depending on the type of player you are, this may or may not be a problem. But I will place it as a con because, as video game enjoyers, we do like variety. And variety is something that this here is lacking. The enemy department, that is. So, on to the next. Another one of the more important thing in a game like this would be the equipment that you can wield. It's not bad here. Although, coming from the Souls games, do not expect the same plethora of armaments at your disposal. No. Khazan is able to wield 3 different types of weaponry. And that is dual weapons, which is an axe and a sword, a great sword, or a spear. That's all you get, those types. You get various different weapons in those types inside the weapon family, which differ in looks and stats, but as for types, you only get those 3. And I would like to actually add that to the not much variety con, as some people can find that a bit lacking. I found out that the gameplay makes up for it, but I will note that it is lacking. It's only 3 weapons. And it's not even all the weapons that you can use as a Slayer Berserker in DFO. But that's another thing that I will iterate later on. So, you can maybe say, well, 3 is not a lot, and I agree, but keep in mind that all 3 of those come with drastically different playstyle and abilities. The duels are quite well balanced, and they allow you to do aggressive long combos, not as swift and smooth as the spear, maybe, and definitely not as big and flashy as the greatsword, but they are quite imposing, and they are quite nicely paced, and you can link them between each other to get quite a long and what's the word I'm looking for? And I'll just say long and awesome combo. So that's that. The greatsword, which I used through, well, I would say more than a half of this playthrough, is slow, but it's heavy in the damage department. But there is positioning to take mind, as attacks take time to charge up and execute before you swing. So this can mean that bad positioning or wrong distance judgment between you and the enemies, which I'm quite frankly guilty of throughout the Let's Play, will mean that you will eat a lot of damage from the enemy, or sometimes outright just throw the battle, unfortunately. Especially if you do it wrong in a boss encounter, so keep that in mind. The spear is your fast, go in, poke poke, jump back weapon. A lot of fast attacks with not as much strength as the other weapon, but great stamina demolishing powers. Especially if you frequently fight phantoms wielding different weapons than you. Phantoms are sort of a bad spirit that you can engage that have the same moveset as Khazan can have, but they wield various different equipment. So you can feel the strength of the loadout when you're fighting a phantom wielding a different weapon than you. And I found that the spear users were quite nimble and quite devastating when it came to stamina attacks. So maybe if that's the playstyle that fits you the most, feel free to try it. For me, the spear was the least enjoyable, but I think it's because when I tried spear, the game actually has a tutorial baked into the story, which is great, for you to try all the different weapon types before you settle on one. And quite frankly, the spear was the one that I least liked, but my theory is because you get that very early in the game. I didn't have much, or any even, skills at my disposal, so I couldn't judge the weapon types properly. And spear is one of the weapon types that has a strong emphasis on special attacks, even more so than the greatsword. They're the bread and butter of the spear combos, so I think that's why it didn't make a favorable impression on me. So keep that in mind. You can always respec throughout the game, so that's not a problem, so to speak. So you can actually pick and choose something that fits your style, and you can even change it during the game like I did with the respec options, which are not pricey. That's also a thing to keep in mind. And like I said a few sentences before, it is not exactly the full same weapon loadout you can use in DFO on the Berserker class. I do understand the decision to do that, because the weapons you could use in DFO would make for quite a, for the lack of a better word, samey gameplay feeling in an action game. They made sense in the way DFO plays, because you had various degrees of stats on the weapon, as well as weapon attack speed and bonuses, which were much more important in DFO than they are here. And although I miss swinging a big-ass blunt weapon as a Berserker, unfortunately I do agree that it would be too similar to the rest of the weapon styles. Unless they could find a way to differentiate, not only skill-wise, but weapon feeling-wise, the weapons between each other, then I would agree that I would like the full Slayer loadout, you know? It's something that seemed to be missing, in my opinion. As for the rest of the loadout, we have a full armor set plus accessories. And all that equipment, which is weapon, armor and accessories, comes in various rarity levels for each individual piece you have equipped. And you can collect full armor sets and full accessory sets, which give additional bonuses depending on how many pieces you have equipped. And those bonuses are not only basic status plus bonuses, there are actually ability bonuses as well, which is cool. The rarity levels on them affect rolls on properties of the set equipment individual pieces. On the set equipment pieces, and that is, well, damage, defense values, bonus attributes, status bonuses. Generally speaking, high rarity gives better stat rolls, even factoring the random window in the roll. You just get bigger, better rolls, depending on the rarity. Okay, yeah, so that will be the equipment. All of this, what I said, plus the fast pace of enemy movement and attacks, is a direct contrast to the Souls game, I feel. You do have some enemies that do more quick attacks, or do sort of combo attacks in Souls games. You have stabby guys, you have guys that, especially in Elden Ring, that do hand-to-hand combos, not so much in Dark Souls from what I remember. But it is slower than here. It is. And it's not as dynamic in the sense of movement and animation as it is here. The Khazan promotes a more active approach in combat instead of positioning. Not to say that positioning is meaningless here. You can play the game in both ways, although I did find that playing more defensively can actually be a problem in some battles. You kind of place yourself in a war of attrition to which you will lose because of your finite item supplies. Or should I say consumable supplies. But with sufficient skill levels and player skill, you can blast the bosses down in one giant combo, which is a heck of a lot of fun to learn and execute, although that kind of a damage, as in just zero the boss from full HP, it's more of a thing that can be done in the New Game Plus due to skill levels and numbers, yeah. And also is a direct contrast to Dark Souls. It's not much of a thing in Dark Souls. You can do heavy attacks in Dark Souls that can take a lot of HP from even a boss. I did a full strength build with two-handing and large-ass maul that did a lot of damage to bosses, but don't remember being able to just zero the boss, like I saw it being a thing in Khazan. So keep that in mind. Khazan also has a hub world, which we'll find familiar for those acquainted with these types of games. So the hub world for our disposal is a place which we can speak to NPCs. And it's also a place that we can craft and use shops. The game offers two primary currencies for us. And that is gold and lacrima. Gold is used to purchase items like consumables, equipment, crafting supplies, etc. While lacrima is required for leveling up your character and increasing attribute stats. There are additional currencies, so to speak. You can use them to level up supports, but those are not mandatory, so I will leave those out for the time being. And as I mentioned crafting, we can talk about that a little here. Crafting is the good old standard in gaming with its mechanisms. It allows you to gear up full sets, as well as craft consumables and accessories, which also come in a set No, I did mention that, also come in a set. Some. To get access to the craftable sets and items, you first need to acquire crafting recipes, and then the appropriate materials. The recipes themselves can be found in the game world, or acquired by beating a specific enemy in a certain way, which can be found in this game's bestiary, which you can access any time of the game. You can check a certain monster, and you have objectives inside, and even the type of reward you will get for clearing that objective. Which is pretty nice for people who like challenges and for people who like collecting stuff. So I like that as well, as it not only gives you more things to collect, it also provides a sort of a challenge, you could say, because you... scratch that. Because there are certain objectives which have you defeat an enemy in a certain way or approach the fight in a certain way, and it's probably a different way that you are approaching the fights normally as you play. I had certain objectives there that needed me to tackle a fight in a slightly different way that I always tackled a fight with that enemy. And I like that part, It actually uses some in-game lore. Yeah, actually in-game lore, because it is a sense in-game to that bestiary, and it uses that and gives you a fun activity to acquire additional power-ups in the form of sets and other things. That is very well thought out. I like that option. The main part of the gameplay and the story is structured around individual missions, set within regions or levels, which include unlockable shortcuts, checkpoints, and side quests given to you by NPCs or found by exploration, but mainly through NPCs that you meet and go through their dialogues. Each level also contains hidden items in the form of collectibles and lore pieces, which I do say hidden, but the lore pieces most of the time are placed in a way where you can see them from even further away before you get to them, and can plan the route or try to see where you can sort of go to get to that place. And that design is a design to encourage exploration of side paths in a level. That is good design. I like that we have an incentive to actually look around. What else could we add here? There is also a transform and support summoning mechanism that we acquired during the game, but I don't think I'll iterate on that, more on that, due to spoilers here, as they don't they don't fundamentally change what I described earlier. They're just another option on top of what we have. So, to discover more about them, I will leave it to you. I will just say that on a very basic level, there is summoning support in battles, or the ability to transform your character for an additional power boost. Shortly timed, but a power boost nonetheless. Okay, that would be all on those things. But I think the amount of options that we have, it's kind of great. It is. I don't know if this is a con, but it's definitely a gray area here that I would like to add, is the reuse of biomes and locations for quests. I say that it is a gray area because of a couple of things. First off, for me personally, it's not a problem, because the locations themselves are quite beautiful looking. And also because of a second thing. The side quest, even though it reuses the biome, it actually puts a tiny spin on the location. And by that I mean you either start from the end and go to the beginning of the base quest, sort of like Uno reverse card, or actually start from a completely different point than the beginning in the main quest in that location, and just go to a certain other point in the location. Mostly the shorter side quests do that you simply have a location within the bigger level. And that personally works out for me, but some players could find it underwhelming, I think. And that's why I'll leave it as a gray area. I do acknowledge the heavy reusability in terms of locations and enemies, but there are elements in the gameplay that, what is the word I'm looking for? Not promote, but actually make this fun for me. That I did not mind the heavy reusability. But that's my point of view here. And I think that will be all for the gameplay section. We covered the basics, we covered the mechanisms, the fights and all. So yeah, I guess we should dive into the next one then. So now we would go to the audio section. And this one is a bit of a mixed bag for me here, as the motifs during normal gameplay and exploration, are nothing that noticeable, I have to say, unfortunately. Honestly, I even had problems with the sound in the recordings, as most of the time the sounds were not that distinguishable and memorable. Sometimes when I was playing, I was even like, did this location even have music? It does have, but most of the time it is fitting, but not very memorable. And even with my audio settings, having the audio levels quite high, I think they're on max, if not... Yeah, I think by default they're quite high. There were times, maybe because I was focused on the action and talking to the microphone, that I didn't quite notice the ambience. It is there. When I was recording for this review, I heard it when I was focusing on it, but during the more dynamic sections you kind of feel like there isn't anything in the background, which is kind of sad. But the thing that saves it from a total disaster is the boss tracks. The boss tracks are where the audio goes up in quality and level quite high. There is a lot of bangers here, including vocal pieces. Maybe it's not the big bang orchestral symphonic choir pieces that you hear in the Souls games, but it's actually quite good. It is quite good. So for me, it will be more of a neutral thing here. It's definitely not a pro, even though, like I said, boss tracks are very good. And definitely not a con, although, like I said, the normal tracks are kind of definitely too far in the background. But if you focus, you can hear them. They're not ear bleeding, they're not bad. They're fair, they're good for the place they are used in, just not very memorable or remarkable. So I'll go with a gray area here. One thing that players new to the genre need to know is, even if you have a banger of a track, if you play a game like this, you have to be used to the fact that a boss, especially a later boss, can take quite a lot of tries, I had a few bosses like that, and that means that even the most banger of a vocal track that you can play, that would mean that you would listen to that track for about a couple of hours, time after time after time again, and it could be rather annoying, I found. Yeah, you can imagine. If the lady is blasting vocals, the same vocals over and over and over again into your ear, and you're just dying because you dodged in the wrong moment, you're gonna be a little angry with the music. You're gonna be. And especially if you are a new player to this type of a game. But it's not the game's fault. It's not the composer's fault, definitely. It's rather a thing that's quite common with those punishing type of games that you need to redo shit from the beginning, It's sort of a trope. You will hear that a lot of times. You will see the things a lot of times. You can't do nothing about it. If you are good, if you're a veteran, if you can clear those fights first try, well, kudos to you first of all, and then you will be kind of immune to the irritating part of those tracks. So take that into consideration. But one thing that I will mark as a con, a very big con, if I would like to add that, is that I don't know how to actually name it. It's an extremely weird decision, but because it had to be a decision, it certainly isn't a fault or a bug. It must have been someone's decision to voice dialogues and in-game, in-engine cutscenes, but do not voice the cinematic cutscenes. Why? Why would you do such a thing? Why voice dialogue in-engine, in-game, but leave out the big cinematic dialogues? Why? I do not understand that. I tried to think about it. You have the actors, you have the voices, you actually recorded, you made the effort to record all the mandatory dialogue, You also made the effort to record some side dialogue, but you did not record the pretty hand-drawn cutscenes between missions? Why? I cannot understand that. And it really breaks the immersion. It actually does. You have a hard-ass boss battle with all the, with all the sparks, abilities, blood flying, elements gushing, choir music, etc., vocals, and nothing. Then you get a cutscene, beautifully drawn, and nothing. Just, I don't know. It's not something that breaks the game in a usage thing, in a usage manner, but it's something that breaks the game in an immersion way. And I do not understand it. I completely do not understand it, and it's a very big con from me. It really is. And that would be all for the audio. So, up next, and that will be video. So, I'll be frank here, the game looks very good. Stunning, I would say, simple as that. The environments are beautiful, the biomes are actually very varied, ranging from mountain passes, snowy mountain passes, to villages, forts, full-blown cities, heck, even cities after a deluge, being covered in water. Yeah, it's quite a lot, it's quite a broad category when it comes to different biomes and looks. The developers went for a cel-shaded approach towards the visuals, and I think it's done really well here, as you can see from the models and the environment. I think a different approach with toned down colors and visuals, like in the previously mentioned Soul games that I do a often comparison here, would be a negative for a DFO based game. Especially since if you look at the screenshots of DFO, it's actually filled with places that are quite varied in the looks department, with big color contrasts. Well, not counting caves and all, because they're caves, duh. But the environments are very contrasted in the DFO game, and this approach I find very fitting to the base material. Even with the use of, like I said, quite vibrant color palette and style, we can see not only vibrant, beautiful nature vistas, but we can also have some pretty gritty and grim visuals portraying the uglier part of humanity and the game world here. So it really comes down to the skill and the use of assets. And I think it's been done very well here. As for a gray area, I mentioned the often reused areas in the gameplay section, but that also iterates to the video, because you are looking at the same visuals just from a either different side or the same side, just a different intersection from the full level. And I will once again say that due to order mechanics interacting each other, this is not a con for me, more of a gray area, but it may be a con for some other people. As for the options, we have some graphical options here, as you can see in the video material. We have the basic settings here, we can just manipulate sort of them. We even have the FSR and DLSS features and modern games give us, which is quite cool. You can use those if you have a appropriate video game card. What? A graphics card. Sorry for that. So yeah, it's not bad here. You also have some accessibility options, which is a very big plus from me to the devs, because not every people have a easy way of navigating through colors or vibrant environments or self-shaded environments, or simply some people have some problems with things. And having a accessibility option is always a welcome thing, and always a thing that I will praise. because that means a lot more people can experience video games. And even with me not having the problems with any accessibility, any audio or visual things, I do very like the developers getting those options, for giving us those options, and I will always praise it. So yeah. And that's all. Honestly, that's all. The video department is very well done. It is faithful to the material, gives us options. That's all here. And I'm pretty cool with that. So yeah, that concludes the video section. Okay, so as always, as the last part, the good old meat and potatoes of the review, and that is my review of the whole game. And honestly, I thought this through for quite a long time, and as I thought about this, I actually have had a lot of trouble, you know, because as a long-time fan of DFO, I think this game is sufficiently different, and at the same time it builds upon the story and expands some motifs that we didn't get to know during the course of the DFO storyline, at least the time I played it. And I stopped playing it about, I don't know, I guess 5 years ago. I kind of remember the raid that was the new thing that I stopped playing, but I don't know how much years ago that was. I remember that Archer was the new class then. We had 2 subclasses of an Archer, the Buffer and another one. So that was new then. I don't remember the storyline that it was during that time, but like I said, I think that this game is not only sufficiently different, but it also defends itself on its own without the need of the older brother's help, you know, the DFO help. So if you're new to this, I think standalone, both the story and the mechanics of the game actually defend itself on its own, and quite good at that, I would say. It's a beautiful dynamic action game, exploring the story of important lore figures in the DFO mythos, and the execution by the devs was, I dare to say, excellent, and all prior mentioned mechanisms in the gameplay section felt well developed and thought through, from the items to the equipment loadout to the moveset and the enemies and their capabilities. It is not without flaws, you know, as for some players there could be not enough variety, which I said in multiple sections of this review video. The enemy types are frequently reused, and I did notice that, and you do notice that, because, you know, if you're 10 hours in and you're beating the same spider mob, or, you know, a dragon or ogrekin or dragonkin mob for the X time throughout the story, you're kind of going, you know, I was expecting something more. And unfortunately, this doesn't deliver on that. But depending on how invested are you in the mechanics, this could be or could not be a con. For me, I do acknowledge it as a con. Too much of the enemy types and too much of the equipment types are actually reused. It's not the variety you are used to in Souls-like games, and the game doesn't, well, it doesn't actually, what's the word here I'm looking for? It doesn't actually pretend that it has more variety than it has. It actually is intertwined in the story that the mobs you face are actually are actually a part of the world that you traverse and that you explore. Because even if you face bandits or corrupted people or animals or dragonkin, for example, the game does say that you do that because there are mechanisms about in the storyline that promote the enemies that you face. You know, either it is chaos spreading, or you're in dragonkin territory, or something like that, you know. So it's okay for me because the game does what's the word? Sorry, I can't seem to find the right words today. Does indeed does oh my god, why I can't find the words today? Does not award, but does it not compromises, but it does provide other things that make it not that much of a problem, you know? Be it the mechanics, or the gameplay, or the quite tightly packed action that the game provides. So, depending on what type of a player you are, this may or may not be a con, but I do acknowledge it as a con, to be fair. So, yeah. Like I said, the variety is definitely a thing here. Is this a large fault of the game? Well, one may wonder about the resources placed here and about the time required to make the game, but I don't know if it's publisher and developer, but Nexon was the publisher of DFO for a while, but things went sour and etc, etc. I think Neopol, if I remember correctly, are developers of DFO, and I think are developers of this. Let me actually check Steam for that, because I want to be fully correct with you. They do not suffer from the lack of resources. Yes, the developer is Neopol, but the publisher is Nexon. Nexon is known as a iffy publisher. You know, the item shop practices, etc, etc. The people in the MMO space probably remember or know some facts about Nexon. So I don't know how much the resources and the time and the money invested in this is Nexon and Neopol's part, but you do feel that this was made to actually what's the word I'm looking for? To actually not take a shortcut, but to actually be smart about the resources used. So, because reusing things is not a bad thing per se. A lot of games reuse assets, and it's not bad out of the bat. But if you reuse them quite frequently and you see the exact spider hour after hour after hour, it may not leave a good impression on the players. So, personally, even though I think the combat dynamics and fluidity compense the fact that we see a lot of things time and time again, I do acknowledge it as a con. Of course. It would not be objective of me to not note it as such. If the game is the game bad? No. If it would be better with more enemy types, yes, of course. Every game is better with more types of equipment, enemies, mechanics, etc, etc. But there are times where you need to say, this is what we're aiming for, this is the scope we are happy with, and this is what we'll go with. And I'm not the person to judge if this is a complete game or not. If they planned to release a DLC, we don't know because, well, this is not spoilers, but this was official. The team was disbanded because of the not sufficient sales of the first Berserker. That's an entirely different thing, which I do not agree with. I mean, maybe the sales wasn't as expected, I don't know what the mark was, but I also don't remember the marketing being that great. I basically followed the game because I was following DFO and I remembered about Project Barbecue, which meant to be, a sort of spiritual successor to DFO. I was following it through the very first press published interviews, and it evolved into Khazan because of various problems, and it was kind of a development hell, so to speak. So I was following it, and it did change a lot. And is it for the best? I don't know. I think it would have a bit more problems being a spiritual successor of a DFO than it has being a other genre of a game. I think it did okay. It did good, and it's its own thing, you know? It's not a clone or a Dark Souls-like game. It's kind of its own, and I think it holds up good in that regard. As well as I'm not sure about the budget and the resources that were used here, because of the long development time, you know? I do know that the game didn't went through as smooth sailing as one would expect. But, well, not all things can, you know, so I think that the end product that we got, the solo single-player experience of an action RPG, is actually quite well done, you know? And if I said something wrong here, please feel free to correct me, because I may very well not remember all the development issues that were along the way. I would also like to point out that even though we got a concise or not very large amount of both weapon types, skills, abilities, etc., etc., the amount what we got is tight enough and well developed enough to provide an excellent gameplay feel and a great flow to the combat and to the mechanics of the game. And I think the execution is quite well, you know? They nailed it to a certain degree. Even though you play and sometimes you feel like, what would it be if I got a bit more, you know? But you could kind of say that about a lot of games, you know? And even though, as a fan, I am sad that some staples of the series, some staples of the DFO didn't get in, like the mentioned previously blunt weapons, or the bigger, badder, better skills from the Berserker's later levels didn't make the cut. I think we had to balance it around Khazan being a historical figure in the world, him being the first Berserker and all, you know, and also being a different type of game. So even though I'm sad not to see those things, I think I understand why, and I think we got what during the development gives a lot of fun, and that it just clicks between one another, you know, mechanic-wise. The story is laid out in a direct way, trying to have little mystery, some mystery, but a little as possible before presenting itself fully, you know? Maybe it's not nothing grand, and maybe we can see it halfway through, but it does hold itself in a way that you feel it's a part of a whole thing, you know? It's not something that you get a Deus Ex Machina or all. It fits in the lore, it fits in the world, and it actually makes sense how they present it, you know? Even though it's quite a simple thing, I also like the fact that the story leaves a little mystery at the end. And I think fans, as well as I, during the last episode, speculate on what could have been the source of that mystery, you know, what happened that things went the way it did. Especially since, which I found extremely nice, we have hints during the game that may leave us on the same track whilst thinking about why X and Y happened. And it's good, it's good. I love it that not only they presented a concise story, that they also left some room for interpretation. That's great. And also I think that the room for interpretation was made here as a maybe potential sequel was planned by the devs. But unfortunately, like I said time before, the devs were disbanded. And honestly, I think that was too hasty of a decision, because the game delivered. The game actually was extremely solid and it delivered on the premise that was set. Maybe the sales figures were too high. Maybe they expected large amounts and marketing just wasn't there. So maybe there's a lot of factors to that. Honestly, if you would ask me how I rate the game, personally, I think it's a 9 out of 10. It's dynamic, it's brimming with action, filled with beautiful vistas and over-the-top boss battles, some actually quite difficult. And you don't have to wait till the end of the game to actually experience difficult boss battles. There were statistics, and quite a lot of early bosses actually killed a lot more players than the later bosses. Which, logically, you would expect, because that's the learning curve you would like, you know? Because early game you're just learning the ropes, maybe you're actually finding the weapon type you would like to use, you're finding what you like the best out of the gameplay styles that are offered to you by Khazan. You're still experimenting with armor sets, you're still experimenting with skill loadouts, so that has sense, and till the end of the game when you mastered your playstyle, you get naturally better. And I think that the statistics presented to us are quite good, that they actually show that the game was developed, well, not intentionally, not the word I'm looking for, because of course it was developed intentionally. It was developed quite well, with a good planning and good difficulty curve, you know. Sprinkle in some collectibles, lore, found out all around the in-game world locations. And we actually have a little for everyone, for action enjoyers, for collectible enjoyers, you know. And like I said, execution is great, and as for problems that I mentioned, which is the variety problem, etc., and the audio problem, if it comes to bugs, I actually encountered one problem. And it's quite a glaring one, and one that I would deduct a solid point from, the almighty 10, and it's a FPS problem, so to speak. I experience big FPS drops. In regards to, I personally think, I actually searched Google to find more proof and more people that had that. I think that it's a problem related to cache or drivers. During my Google investigation, it seemed that a few people also had the same problem, and other people on the internet suggested that it is a driver problem. But the problem is, they suggested during the time, and Khazan premiered quite a while ago, they suggested beta drivers or re-rolling drivers in that time, so I would have to re-roll quite a lot. And using the drivers, the modern drivers, that I have for Nvidia, it made the game quite iffy, because for the most of the time it actually ran correct, but sometimes it dropped by quite noticeably. It stuttered quite heavily, and then I was kind of finagling what to do with the game, because the drops didn't end till I hadn't do this good old Steam verify files. I filed, I cleared the cache on Steam, and while it rendered the files, it rendered anew, and I played a while, and the cache actually made the magic it does. It seemed to work better, but I noticed during the Let's Play course that if I left the game for about a week or so, when I came back to it, it definitely had the problems again. I definitely had to once again clear the cache and verify the game files and give it time to cache the files anew. Only then it worked correctly again. So there is definitely something going on here, and it's not that good. I don't think we're going to have a patch regarding that issue, because of the whole disbanding of the team, you know. But honestly, I didn't experience any crashes or errors during the full playthrough, which means that I think the Q&As did their job very well. There aren't any game-breaking errors, you're not being assaulted by a crash to the desktop or anything. It played smoothly aside from the FPS drops after a while of not playing, which is kind of funky, I know. All in all, you know, every piece of this puzzle is done quite well and fits the whole picture of the whole action genre. The devs did their homework, they set bounds on how many things they want in this game, because remember that when I say lack of variety, it also means the different scope and time of developing the game. I know that Nexon and Neopol are not an indie company. You know, Nexon is a very big company with very big resources. Neopol also has resources for the years of hosting DFO now. And would I say it could have been done better? Yes, it very well can, but would the scope change? The scope could dramatically change, the time could dramatically change, and if there was a contract, there was a contract, you know. I know about the subtleties, I know about software development, and I know that even though you can kind of judge it hastily, it's not always that easy, you know. But if you look at it in another way, the concise scope that they picked meant that it enabled them to polish the existing things to a quite high level. And if you play this game and the mechanics click with you and you pick your weapon type and you just combo it out with the bosses, the enemies, etc., you can see that there's actually quite a lot of thought put into it. And the polish is quite nice in this game, you know? But if you ask me, is this game for everyone? I would say no. Honestly, no, it's not. It's not even taking account the score that I will give this game. I think, genuinely, that this is not a game I would recommend for everyone. And simply because not all people like punishing games. I know a lot of people in real life that are just like... I talked with them and they're just like, you know, I like playing video games, but if a video game just punishes me for not learning perfectly a pattern or not trying hours and hours enough, why would I play it? And I kinda understand that point of view. Not everyone is the same type of player, you know, and not for everyone trying a boss for the second hour or the third hour or the fourth hour is fun, you know. Not everyone likes to play the game that way. Some people like, for example, like the type of fast-paced gameplay, like the high reflex requirements, but maybe are not on point of the whole if you fail you cannot try till you succeed type of things, you know. And I understand that. I'm not the best player when it comes to these games, this type of games, so it's hard for me to not say that they are right or wrong, you know. It's everyone else's own opinion, and everyone likes something else. So please take that into account before you think about getting the game. And also, unfortunately, there is no demo of the game to try it before you buy it. So you cannot do it like that, I'm afraid. And like I said, a very sad turn of events was the fact that after the anniversary patch, the devs actually left a message that they planned to support the game. They had some more plans during the supposed life of the game, but I think they were meant with an unfortunate message from the higher-ups, you know? I'm not sure if there was a DLC planned, but I think it could have been, you know? I think it could have been. I think it was a good project for the devs. But the Khazan team was dismantled and was put, if I recall the article correctly, was put into different divisions inside the company. And the reason, like I said before, was cited being that Khazan did not perform in line with the expectations. I do not remember even seeing what the expectations were like, and we all know that sometimes shareholders don't have the most probable, the expectations of the shareholders are not the highest probability of even happening, you know? Sometimes they just want too much that can actually happen. And personally, and there was quite a lot of things that contributed to that. Personally, I only knew about the game because I frequently check DFO news. I'm even still subscribed to DFO newsletters, even though I put the game down years ago. I just like to see what they develop and what they have planned next, you know? So, I think that for the fans of the genre, and those not afraid of what I mentioned just now, it is quite a good game to try. I think it is. I think it's honestly developed quite well, in contrast to some titles that we get nowadays, you know, from top AAA studios and all. But it's not perfect, but I think it's well done. If you would ask me what I would see in a hypothetical sequel, I would definitely like to see more of weapon types, more of armor types, more of enemy types. But I also speculated during the LP, I also did some theory crafting during the LP that I would like to actually see the next game as a start of a generic Slayer character like in DFO, where you could implement a class change mechanism and import the classes from a Slayer from DFO, you know? So that way you can choose from one of X classes as an advancement during the storyline, and then you can more easily, but more fluidly implement additional weapon types, additional play styles, additional abilities. I think that would actually do the game quite well, you know? I think it will be a big plus for the game. But I do understand at the same time that it changes the scope entirely, you know? It makes it a lot bigger, it makes the Q&A stuff a lot more intensive and a lot longer, but, you know, hey, we're pushing here and we're just theory crafting here, so whatever the paper takes, you know? We can all think about things that we would like to see in a potential sequel. So, how I would rate the game, you know? Yeah. I think and I would let, you even heard about it during this review, that a little bit of fanboyism is definitely bleeding into this review, but taking into account everything that the game did, and taking into account some of the cons, which mainly is the variety, which actually, what's the word I'm looking for, which actually presents itself through more than one point of this review. We have lack of variety in audio, lack of variety in video, lack of variety in gameplay aspects. Not fully there, but there are some aspects that lack variety. Like I said, weapon types, enemy types, not memorable music, reuse of biomes, etc., etc. So it is prominent throughout the different types of angles that I took on this review, that the variety is a thing. But it's only the variety that is a thing. And honestly, like I said earlier, some of the variety issues are offset by the mechanisms, the mechanics that the game provides. And the lack of variety in biomes and enemies were offset by me by the smooth gameplay that the game provided. That's why I said that this is a 9 out of 10. I think I said that previously. Yes, if not, that it's a 9 out of 10. And I stand by it. It's a well done game. And there are no blatant cons and errors. There are no crashes to the desktop that I experienced. There are no constant bugs that you won't actually get rid of without a little bit of verify files or clearing the cache. Even the FPS drops I cleared like that, when I actually was not stubborn enough to do that, because if you've seen the Let's Play, I was quite stubborn for a few episodes to do that, because I don't know why, which I'm sorry for. And I think that the way the story is written, it's not only for the hardcore fans, it's also for new players. So, not only fans of the genre, but also those that are not afraid of what I mentioned before in all those sections of the review, would like to tackle. I think that this is actually a good game to try. So yeah, I think that I can give it, with a straight face, a 9 out of 10. It is a high mark, it's not a perfect mark, but to the degree and the scope that has been picked for the game, it does things good. It does things very good. I didn't feel like playing it was a chore all those hours. I didn't feel tired. I didn't feel like it's imposing something on me that, oh my god, I need to end this because so and so I started it and I'm recording it. I had fun. I had fun, and I think this is a well-made title. Is it a perfect title? No, it's not. It's definitely not a perfect title. Is there glaring bugs that you are unable to play or cannot stomach while playing it? No, there is not. There's actually not any of those things. So, I think this is a... well, first off from the company, because previously they didn't make a game like this, and I think that's an excellent thing to have in their portfolio. Shame that the marketing and the expectations weren't on par, but I think that none of the artists, devs, or people behind the project should feel ashamed that they did it. It is an excellent game, and I'm talking about not only a fan of DFO, I'm talking about a person who played this game and had fun. Genuinely had fun with it. So, take that what it is. I think it's one of the most fun things I actually Let's Play this year. So I would like to thank you for listening, I would like to thank you for your time as always, and I hope to see you guys in future LPs, and you know, there probably won't be a Khazan 2, but you never know, maybe something will happen in the minds of the Neo people or the Nexon people, and maybe they'll say, hey, remember the game we made? How about we make a number 2 of that? You never know. So yeah, even if that's a not optimistic possibility, it is a possibility. So thank you, as always, thank you for listening, and I would like to wish you everything good, and see ya in the next ones. Cześć!